Everything you own is dying. The steel in your kitchen is rusting right now in places you cannot see. Copper turns green. Plastic goes yellow and brittle in the sun. Every single thing you own is on its way somewhere, and most of it is getting there faster than you are. Except one thing. Somewhere in your house there is a ring or a thin chain in a drawer, and it has not changed in 10 years or 30 or your entire life. It is exactly the color it was on the day it was made. It will be exactly that color on the day everybody who has ever seen it is dead. 6,500 years ago, on a lake shore beside the Black Sea, somebody noticed exactly what you just noticed. Keep what they noticed in one sentence because this whole story comes back to it. Everything they owned was dying. This one thing wasn't. What they did about it stayed in the ground until 1972. A 22-year-old cutting a cable trench drove his digger straight through 6 kilos of it. And the people whose entire job is putting dates on things refused to believe the dates, because gold to these people was useless. Too soft to hold an edge, stupidly heavy, impossible to eat. In a world where every single thing had to earn its keep, gold earned nothing at all, and they wanted it more than anything that did. You already have a guess about why. Everybody does. Hold on to it, because the strangest fact in this whole story is the reason your guess cannot be right. So what was it for? Start with the uselessness, because it is worse than it sounds. Pick up a piece of pure gold and press your thumbnail into it and you will leave a mark. It is one of the softest metals there is. You cannot make a knife out of it because the edge folds over the first time it meets bone. You cannot make an axe. You cannot make a spear point or a scraper or a needle that will go through hide or anything at all that a person in 4500 BC needed to get through a winter. It is also heavy. Stupidly heavy. A lump of gold the size of your fist weighs about as much as the heaviest bowling ball they make, which means every piece of it you carry is a piece of something else you are not carrying. And you cannot eat it. Every other thing those people valued, they valued because it did a job. Flint cut. Copper held an edge. Hide kept the cold out. Bone made needles. Wood made fire. Every single valuable thing in that world earned it by being good for something. Gold is good for nothing, and they wanted it more than any of it. So go back and look at the world they were standing in. It is the Copper Age on the western shore of the Black Sea. There are villages and farms, and there are people who have learned how to get metal out of rock, which is a genuinely new trick, and it has changed everything. And everything in that world is dying in front of them. Watch it happen. The copper axe that took a week to make comes out of the mold the color of a new penny, and within a season it has gone dull, and within a few years it is crusted over in that flat green that will not come off. Meat spoils in a day and milk turns overnight. Grain goes moldy in a wet store, and the whole village is hungry by spring. Wood rots from the inside, so a roof beam looks fine right up until the morning it comes down. Cloth wears through and leather cracks, teeth go, eyes go, and people go. A person is standing in front of you talking, and then they are on the ground, and then they are in the ground. And then, over a few years that you have to live through, there is less and less of them down there until there is almost nothing. That is the world. Everything they owned was dying, and so was everybody they knew, and there was nothing anybody could do about any of it. Now, almost every metal on Earth is locked inside rock. You need to know the rock has metal in it, and you need a fire hot enough to get it out, and somebody has to invent both of those ideas first. Gold is not locked in anything. Gold sits in rivers as metal, in grains and flakes, and sometimes in lumps, already finished, waiting. You do not need a furnace. You do not need to know any chemistry. You need to be a person walking along a river, looking down when the light is right. And one day somebody was. Somebody bends down in a riverbed and picks something up. And then they do the obvious thing. They keep it, and they look at it, and a year later it looks the same. 10 years later it looks the same. It goes in the ground and comes out of the ground and looks the same. It goes in a fire and comes out of the fire and looks the same. Their axes were going green. Their roofs were rotting. Their grandparents were bones by now. And this had not moved. Not a shade, not a mark, not one single sign that the world had touched it at all. And before you say it, yes, it is beautiful. But beautiful was not rare. These people had shells and feathers and beads and red ochre for their skin. Humans had been decorating themselves with useless pretty things for 50,000 years, and every one of those things died like everything else. Feathers molt, shells dull and crack. Ochre washes off in the first rain. Even beauty rotted. And here is the part that matters. A copper axe, fresh out of the mold, shines just as hard as gold. For about a week. The shine was never the special part. The keeping of it was. Gold does not look like that because somebody polished it. Gold looks like that because it has never once, in the entire history of the world, stopped. And do not say stone. Stone lasts, but stone is the ground itself. Stone belongs to everybody and shines for nobody. Gold was the only thing they had ever seen that behaves like stone and looks like fire. Now come forward to 1972 to a city on the Bulgarian coast called Varna. There is a man on a digger cutting a trench for an underground cable through an industrial estate. His name is Rachel Morinov, and he is 22 years old. Ordinary job. Nobody is looking for anything. He turns up some metal, and it is small, and it is bright, and there is a lot of it. 6,500 years in wet Black Sea soil, and it came out the exact color it went in. He does not report it. He takes it home in a shoebox, puts the shoebox next to his boots, and leaves it there for weeks. The oldest gold treasure on Earth in a shoebox next to a pair of work boots, because a 22-year-old did not know what else to do with it. Eventually, he takes it to a man he knows, a museum curator called Ivan Ivanov, who will spend most of the next 20 years digging up what Marinov drove through, which is a graveyard. 294 graves in the end. Most of them hold almost nothing. A few hold some, and a handful hold nearly all of it. More than 3,000 separate objects made of gold, weighing more than 6 kilos altogether. Pick that up and it is a bowling ball, made of rings and beads and plates thinner than paper. Then the dates come back, and they are wrong. That is the first reaction from serious people. The dates say 4,600 to 4,200 BC, and that cannot be right because at that date there is no Egypt, there are no pyramids and no pharaohs, and there is nothing in Mesopotamia that looks remotely like this. The place where the world's gold is supposed to start does not have any yet. But nobody wanted to believe those dates, and then the radiocarbon came back and said it twice. There is more gold in this trench than archaeologists have found from the same centuries in the entire rest of the world put together. Egypt included, Mesopotamia included, a cable trench in an industrial estate on the wrong coast, thousands of years too early. And the strangest grave in it has a number, and the number is 43. Grave 43 is a man in his 40s. He is laid out on his back, and he is about 1.70 meters tall, which for that time and place makes him taller than almost every man he ever stood next to. And there is 1.5 kilos of gold on him, the weight of a laptop, laid out over a dead man in pieces. Nearly 1,000 separate objects, rings on his fingers, and more rings on strings around him. 2 necklaces, 10 big plates of gold laid out across his body, and gold bangles on his arms. Beside him a bow, with gold worked into the wood, a stone axe, and an axe whose whole handle is wrapped in gold. He is not wearing gold, he is covered in it. Now hold that image and think about the size of the world it came out of. These are people who farm and herd and fish, who live in houses of mud and wood in a scatter of villages around a lake, and they took 1.5 kilos of the rarest thing any of them had ever seen, and they put it in a hole, and they covered it over, and they walked away and left it there. Which is the point where you are probably telling yourself the obvious thing. He was rich. He was a king, or a chief, or a priest. Rich people get buried with their money. So let me take that away from you. Was he a chief? Almost certainly. A priest? A big man? Whatever word you want. He had power over other people, and this cemetery is the oldest hard proof of a pecking order anywhere on Earth. But he was not rich. Because rich, the way you mean it, had not been invented yet. There was no money, not coins obviously, but also nothing behind the coins. No prices, no wages. Nobody had ever seen a number that told you what a thing was worth. Yes, they traded. Shells came up from the Aegean. Salt went out by the ton. Copper moved hundreds of miles. But swapping a thing for a thing is not money, and there was no market anywhere in that world where you could carry in a gold ring and be told what it came to. The first coins in the world were struck in a kingdom called Lydia in what is now Turkey around 600 BC. 4,000 years after this man went into the ground. 4,000 years. This man was buried before anybody on Earth had built a wheel. And the wheel is the close one. Money is 4 times further away from him than the wheel is. There was no money in that world in the way there is no music in a room with no instruments and nobody singing. So he is lying in a hole with 1.5 kilos of a metal that cannot cut, cannot be eaten, cannot be spent, and cannot be used for one single practical thing. And yes, you could swap it. You can swap anything. But think about what a swap actually needs. It needs the other person to want the thing. And the only reason anybody in that world would hand over a cow for a piece of soft yellow metal is that they wanted it too, just as badly, and could not have told you why either. The wanting came first. It is underneath every trade. It is not explained by them. He was not rich, nobody was. But everything they owned was dying, and one thing was not, and every person standing at that graveside knew it. And if you are still holding on to some version of this, if you are still thinking that the gold was his and it went in the ground because it belonged to him, then there is one more thing in that cemetery that takes even that away. Some of those graves have nobody in them. Not robbed, not decayed to nothing. Dug properly, filled properly, closed properly, and empty. No body was ever put in them. Archaeologists call them symbolic graves, which is a polite way of saying a grave with the entire point of a grave removed. And some of the richest graves in that whole cemetery, the ones most packed with gold, are those empty ones. And in 3 of them, where the head would have gone, if there had been a head, they laid a mask. A face made of clay, unbaked, the size of a real face looking up. And they picked out the features in gold, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the teeth in it. Underneath, where the neck would have been, they placed small gold pieces shaped like women. So there is a hole in the ground with a clay face in it, staring up at the people filling it in, with gold teeth and gold eyes, wearing gold at a throat that does not exist, on a body that was never there. Now try to explain that one with wealth. You can say the hole stood for somebody. A man lost at sea, a body never brought home, fine. Then look at what they gave the man who was not there, more than almost any man who was. The less body, the more gold. The gold is not there because a person was there. The gold is there because the hole was there. And if this was about showing off, explain the burying. Display needs eyes. They took the most visible thing in their world and put it in the one place where no eye would ever land on it again. So here is what I think they were doing, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Go back to the list. Their copper went green. Their meat spoiled, and their grain molded, and their roofs came down, and their leather cracked, and their teeth fell out, and their people went into the ground and disappeared. They lived in a world where the single most reliable fact was that everything ends. Not as a philosophy, as a thing you watched constantly with your own eyes from the day you were born. And they had found one exception, exactly one, something that came out of a river already finished and then refused, absolutely refused, to take any part in it. So ask what you would do with the only permanent thing in a world where nothing is permanent. You would not spend it because spending does not exist. You would put it where the ending happens. That is what a grave is. A grave is the one place on earth where nobody can pretend that things last. And they filled it with the one thing that does. They were not burying his wealth with him. They were putting the only thing that never ends into the place where everything does, and they had just watched him stop. Now stand at the edge of that hole, because somebody actually stood there. This is not a picture, it is a place, and a person was in it, holding what you are about to hold. There is a man in the ground in front of you. You knew him. 2 days ago he was talking. Now he is on his back at the bottom of a hole with the cold coming off the soil, and he is already starting to do the thing that everything does. And in your hands is the gold. The people who made it are standing there, watching you hold it. It is the only thing any of you have ever owned that will look the same tomorrow. And the same after that. You could keep it. Nobody would stop you. There is no law yet. There is not even a word for what keeping it would be. And you drop it into the hole. Then you put earth on it. And you keep putting earth on it until the shine is gone, and then a while longer, and then you walk back to a village where everything is still rotting. That is the whole thing in one motion of one arm, the one permanent thing they had, put into the dark on purpose by somebody who then turned around and went on living with everything that was not. Look at what that cost them, because it was not free. There were no mines. Nobody was digging gold out of the ground in 4500 BC because nobody knew it was down there. The oldest gold mine anybody has ever found comes 1,000 years later. Every grain of that 6 kilos came out of moving water, which means somebody stood in a cold river, bent over, for a very long time. You take up gravel in a shallow wooden dish and you swirl it. and the light stuff washes over the lip and the heavy stuff stays, and gold is the heaviest thing in there, so gold stays. Then you do it again. Then you do it again. A river gives you flakes, grains mostly, some of them smaller than a grain of sand, 3,000 objects, out of grains. And a river in that part of the world is snowmelt. Your feet stop being yours inside a minute. You work while the light works, bent double, and you straighten up at the end of a day holding less metal than would fill a tooth, and then it has to be made into something, and that is the part that should change how you see these people. There is no wheel to turn it on. Nobody has invented one yet. There is no press, no vise, no measuring tool. There is a stone to hammer on, a fire, and a person. They beat the gold into sheet thinner than a fingernail, and when the metal hardened and began to tear, they had worked out that you put it back in the fire until it forgives you, and then you beat it again. And for the shapes that hammering could not make, they melted it. Charcoal and a clay pipe to blow down, and somebody blowing on that fire until it reached the temperature where gold gives up and runs like water. The oldest cast gold on Earth is in that cemetery. So is the oldest known example of the trick with wax and molten metal that jewelers still use today, 6,500 years later. Not a lucky afternoon on a riverbank. A craft, invented for a graveyard. Look at the 10 plates laid across that man's body and count how many hours are lying on him. Not one clever craftsman having an idea. Hundreds of ordinary repeated hours by somebody who was not farming while they did it, being fed by people who were. Hundreds of hours, all of them mortal. The people spending them were dying at the usual speed. The thing that hours went into was not. When you hear a story like this, your head does a thing without asking you. It stretches it. You imagine a tradition, generations of it, grandfather to father to son, 1,000 years of people slowly filling a hillside with gold. That is not what happened. The dating on that cemetery has been done twice, and the second time, grave by grave, it came back tight and short. The whole graveyard was in use for about 100 years, and the enormous graves, the ones like 43, seem to sit inside 50 or 60 of them. 50 years. That is one working life, spent on the one thing that outlasts working lives. There are people alive who have been at the same job longer than the richest burial ground in the ancient world was open. So this is not a slow accumulation. It is a burst. Somewhere on that lake shore, inside about 2 human lifetimes, a small number of people did something with gold that nobody on Earth had done before, and nobody would do again on that scale for thousands of years. And most of them got none of it. That is the part the graves prove, and it is the part the gold is built to make you miss. You heard the numbers earlier and you walked straight past them because the gold was in the way. Go back. 294 holes in the ground. Most hold a flint blade, a pot, a single bead. A handful hold nearly everything. And holes do not decide. Somebody decided that. Somebody decided which hole got 1.5 kilos of the only permanent thing in the world, and which hole got a bead, and which hole got a broken pot, and some earth. That decision is older than money, older than writing, older than every empire you could name. Nobody wrote it down, nobody needed to. It is lying in the ground in the exact proportions they left it in, and you can still walk into a museum in Varna and see who won. And we even know what they paid for it, which is the detail that should stop you. Just inland, there is a walled town called Solnitsada, the oldest walled settlement anybody has found in Europe. And what that town did was boil water. Salt water, out of springs, in clay pots, over fires, day after day after day, until the water was gone and the salt was left. Thousands of kilos of it going out the same way the gold came in. You already heard it pass by. Salt went out by the ton. That salt is what the region had that everybody else wanted. And that salt, as near as anybody can tell, is what bought the metal in these graves. So the thing that paid for the immortal metal was the thing that dissolves in rain. And then, after about a century of it, they stopped. The great graves end. The gold stops going into the ground. Within a few hundred years, the villages around that lake are abandoned, and whoever lives there next is not doing this anymore. Nobody would bury gold like that again for thousands of years. The technique for casting it was invented here, used here for a lifetime or two, and then it was not used by anybody, anywhere, for a very long time. Which leaves the objects, made in about a century by people who stopped out of a metal that does not. And when somebody tells you that gold is valuable because it is rare, and it does not tarnish, and it is easy to weigh and hard to fake, they are telling you the truth about a question that came much later. That is the answer to why gold became money. It is not the answer to why we wanted it. We wanted it first. We wanted it for 4,000 years before there was anything to do with it, and then, much later, we built prices and coins and vaults and markets on top of a wanting that was already there, and we told ourselves the prices had caused it. The man in grave 43 has been in the ground for 6,500 years. There is not much left of him. Brown bone and brown earth, and less of it every century. The gold he was buried in has not changed by one shade. That was the entire point. He was not taking his money with him because there was no money. He was being buried with the only thing anybody had ever found that does not die by people who had just finished watching him do exactly that. And about a third of that cemetery has still never been dug. It is under an industrial estate in Bulgaria, right now, today, not changing. Somewhere in your house there is a ring or a thin chain in a drawer, and it has not changed in your entire life. Everything else you own is on its way somewhere. That one thing is not. Now you know why somebody wanted one first.